Hello, Asad. Welcome. He's still muted. He might be looking for some headsets or something. Let's give him a minute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep. Hello. Welcome. Welcome to the to the show.
Thanks.
Okay. Cool.
Hang
So
on. Let me
yeah,
just
sure.
open the stream here so I can follow along with what's going on.
Yeah, sure. Just don't just mute the sound because otherwise it will be very confusing. I think. Um,
Right.
yeah. So let's see. What's the so yeah, first of all, I would I'd like to introduce you, but I don't know a lot about you other than what I've seen in Slack, right? So what I know about Asad is that he's been in this Slack for a while now. He's been like you're very helpful. You're answering a lot of questions, especially when it comes to like on Haskell and category theory. You seem to be very into category theory. And then I know personally that you've been very nice to me in the sense that you've joined my streams and you've helped me figure out stuff. So and I had a lot of fun. Like I think we've what was it like 2 or 3 streams or something where you even hopped on Discord and we chatted on like the codecs and the data flow thing. So yeah, that's the extent of what I know about. And I think I also know that I think you spent some time with Sandy as well, right, working on some projects. But I think that's pretty much everything I know about you. So would you like to introduce yourself or say a few words?
Sure, yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Asad. I like FP and category theory and whatnot. Um, and yeah, I've been hanging out in the Slack a lot. It's just I find that it's a good place to learn stuff because there's always something cool going on. Someone's posting something about a new project that they're working on, or someone has an interesting question, stuff like that. And I find that this is actually something that you mentioned as well, Vlad, earlier. In that you find that like trying to teach things or explain things is a good way to learn
Mm-hmm.
how things work, right? And
Definitely.
I think that's a really good way to do things, and I think that's very effective for me as well. So like you can start explaining something that you don't really understand, and then the uh, over a series of corrections of like someone will correct you if you get something wrong, blah blah blah, and then eventually you'll sort of get the hang of the concept
Yeah.
that way. I think that's a fun way to learn.
Yeah, I think it's a very
Um,
effective way to learn as well.
that's
Not only
right.
is it
Yeah,
fun. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Sorry. Go
yeah.
on.
So there's that. Right now, I work as a quality engineer at a company here in Canada. It used to be a really small company, but it's been swallowed up by a series of larger corporations and so on. And I find that like working as a quality engineer is kind of fun because there's not a lot of restrictions on what kinds of tools you can use because you're sort of just using scripting languages and you're making user interfaces for internal use. So you don't have like a giant team that all needs to agree on what technology you're using. You can sort of experiment with things a lot. So, for example, I can use Nix because I know how it works, and I can sort of train the team that's because I'm sort of developing the solution from scratch. So I can build it and I can explain it to people, and then that way I can sneak Nix into the thing without a lot of resistance. Um,
That's a very
whereas
interesting way
otherwise,
to do that, right? Because I never thought about that. But yeah, that's that makes a lot of sense, right? Because like if you're building the product, then you need to onboard a lot of people. You need like the signature from from the CEO almost, right? If you want to introduce a new technology, like a lot of people want to weigh in their opinion. But when you're just doing internal stuff, then most people don't care as long as you get your job done, right?
right, exactly, because like almost every 2 or 3 weeks, it's a new greenfield project, right? And I don't think there's any like big development shops or like any development project really where you get that kind of thing. Maybe if you're doing like some really intense microservices thing, you'd get something like
Mm-hmm.
that. But I find that like just being able to work on small projects that you tweak and maintain, and like you can just sort of understand the whole project at a glance. That's a lot of fun for me, and it gives me an opportunity to learn a lot of stuff and try out different things, which I think
Cool,
is fun.
cool. I never thought
Um,
about it like that way, but yeah, that's totally correct.
right.
Huh? That's interesting. Okay.
So yeah, so that's what I do for work, and like I don't really have any formal education in this stuff. I like my degree is actually in mechanical engineering, which doesn't have
Okay.
anything to do with any of this stuff.
And I don't
Um,
presume you've done any category theory during that.
no, unfortunately not. Actually, the funny thing is, like, now that I've learned a little bit of one other thing here, I would like to disclaim that I actually don't know that much category theory. Like, if you're in the category theory room right now, you can see me asking all these embarrassing questions and people explaining things to me. And you can actually see me sort of learn in real time, like what the things that I'm talking about. So right now, I could start talking about NR categories, but I learned what the like I didn't even know they existed 5 minutes ago. So it's very easy to like give the illusion of knowing what you're talking about when there's people explaining things to you. But yeah, so my point here is like now that I've learned a little bit of category theory, I can see a lot of like interesting physical applications for that sort of thing. And I think actually one of the most like prolific category theorists, like I don't want to get this wrong, but
Hmm.
there's this guy called John Bays,
Hmm. Yeah.
and he does like a lot of yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
See, he's pretty big on Twitter. Let me link his Twitter just in case people don't know what you were talking about. But please continue.
Great. And I think he's a physicist originally, and his most of his like applications for stuff, like he's not, you know how like Bartosz Milewski is like the person who
Hmm.
popularizes applying category theory to programming, right? Like, or
Yeah.
the closest to human level category theory, like for the average programmer,
Yeah. Yeah.
explain
Yeah.
things for them, right? So he sort of his applications papers, like where he tries to apply category theory, are mostly for physics, I think.
Hmm.
So he there's lots of like different things with applying groups, and I don't understand most of that stuff, but there's lots of like really interesting physical applications for category theory.
Okay.
And now I wish that I'd done it in the other order. Like I'd learned some category theory and then some research on, because like my final year courses were fluid dynamics and finite element analysis and lots of things like that. And I think a lot of that could actually have a lot of interesting applications with category theory.
Hmm.
But anyway,
Okay.
that's just me waving my hand and speculating. But I suspect that if someone looked into it, there'd be a lot of cool stuff.
Cool. Interesting. Yeah, I think like well on this subject, I think a lot of physicists, or at least some in my experience at least, tend to gravitate towards FP or category theory or things like that, right? You've already mentioned Baez and then Bartosz, of course, the like the most popular ones, obviously. But for example, at my previous job, I had the team leader that we had was. Um, a person named Tom who's very very like who has a PhD in physics, and then he just kind of quit that world and started doing Haskell, and he's one of the a relatively big contributor to Nix, and he's had done like Cabal contributions and so on, like somebody who really got into Haskell right from and doesn't do much physics anymore.
Right, I see.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Interesting. There's like this thing called math envy, I think, where like if you're in a sort of an applied science, you sort of have this envy of subjects that are purer than yours and more like elegant and beautiful. Actually, there's this really interesting XKCD comic about this stuff.
I think it also goes the other
Uh,
way around because, for example, my wife is has a math PhD, and she's doing research with logic and computer science, but she's doing things that are very close to theory, right? She's doing like multi-value logics, and funnily enough, one of our first conversations about math and abstraction and so on, she was telling me like she was trying to explain to me what kind of paper she was working on and what it was about, and I was like, oh, I'm so close to understanding what you're trying to say. Could you give me an example how this thing works? And she looked at me. I'll never forget that look. She looked at me like an absolute idiot, right? And like, what do you mean an example? Why do you need examples? Don't you get it's an abstract thing, right? Why do you need an example? And I was like,
uh-huh.
that's when I was closely like, I was
But
definitely,
that's
yeah.
strange though, like because I would imagine that even maybe that's not true though. Like I would imagine that even like people who work on really abstract stuff start from some concrete example and then
I
like
would
they sort
imagine
of
the same
generalize.
as a programmer, but I can guarantee you that
Maybe they're not human. They're not human
yeah,
beings. They're like
I
some
joke
kind
about that as well with my wife that she's not human, so
of
maybe I don't know, but yeah, that was And what I was going to say that although despite this, she also does get this sort of envy of, oh, that's, I wish I could do something that had easy examples to choose, right, or that has something that I could like see or something like that, right? And lately she's been lately she's been like trying to do some pure script and like generative art or whatever, like something to to feel like she's doing something like tangible, as you said, right? I mean, as tangible as a pure script program is.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think in that sense, like programming is actually one of the most tangible things in the sense that it's very cheap to get something to sort of apply things, right? Like it takes almost nothing to apply some really abstract idea and
Mm-hmm.
get some kind of applied instance of it in programming. In some
Mm-hmm.
kind of like physical, in mechanical engineering or whatever, it's a little bit there's a little bit more of like an activation energy or like a barrier to entry before you can
I
apply
get
things
it.
that you're interested in.
Yeah, it could even be very expensive at some point, right? To try things out, right? To do an
Right.
experiment, or if you have an idea, right? So, whereas here, it's, I mean, even if FP, it could get expensive at some point, right? Because if you want to try out some language design idea, that could be expensive in man hours at least, right? Hey, I need to implement this thing in GHC or whatever, right? So it could,
Right.
but again, probably not at the scale that it could be for
I mean, I
physics.
think that's actually one of the things that like comes back to the thing I was talking about, where if you want to experiment with stuff, and really that's the only, I mean, unless you're just working on this stuff 24/7, if you're a professional programmer, you need to sort of test out these ideas in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace, right? And so if something goes wrong, there's a cost to that, and cost is too big if the project is too big, and
Yeah,
so people never try
yeah.
different interesting approaches.
Yeah, a lot of people like Matt Parsons, and I think a lot of other people agree. But like, I remember having this conversation with him at some point, are talking about the like novelty budget, right? Where you kind of need to be careful about where you spend your novelty points within a project like that, right? So if you want to do if you're already doing Haskell, you're already spending some of that novelty budget there, right? Because it's obviously not the mainstream thing to do. And then if you want to use like, depending on the libraries you want to use, the kind of language extensions, or like how fancy you want to get it might get hairy pretty fast and hard to like replace people, hard to, yeah.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
okay. So how did you get into FP then? Because or into programming, right? From the get go, right? Because it seemed like you're.
Well, I got into programming because actually originally I was in a co-op program. Actually, mechanical engineering does involve a lot of programming. I mean, I put programming here in air quotes because it's
Mhm.
like it's the kind of programming. Have you heard of MATLAB?
Yep.
Like if you go to the MATLAB subreddit, it's all everyone's just complaining about MATLAB. That's what that language is. But it's interesting. It's sort of like a data processing language, and it lets you sort of implement stuff for doing engineering calculations easily.
Hmm.
So that's the kind of programming I was doing. Then I got a co-op job at one of these companies doing as a like I was doing a I was in an engineering department, but they needed some they had some sort of documents to fill out, and I sort of automated that using I don't remember what it was at the time. It was like bb.net, and it was just some horrible monstrosity made out of lots of different parts of glue code. Uh, and hopefully I never see that again. But anyway, like I just hacked something together, and I feel like that's how most people get their start, or at least
Hmm.
I hope I'm not the only person who made something horrible
Oh yeah, for
as
sure.
their first thing. Yeah. So I did that, and I really enjoyed it. Right. I
Hmm.
enjoyed sort of the feeling of being able to take a problem and sort of just the requirements were and write down the solution, and then the solution actually starts working. Right. Like I didn't have to construct anything with my hands, or
Hmm.
um, I don't really know how to explain it. It's very like it gives you this feeling of power to be able to solve problems that way.
Yeah, yeah, I get
Um,
it.
and so yeah, so I got really hooked on that, and then I started slowly, as I ran into different problems, I started slowly drifting towards like when you're writing programs in C sharp, only use static methods. I think I saw you do that as well in some of your .NET code. So you never write like just-based methods or like use inheritance because things start going wrong.
Yep.
So like as I sort of ran into all these roadblocks, I slowly drifted towards FP. I think it might also be a little bit of like a subjective thing, like a certain personality type that gravitates
Towards FP.
towards FP as opposed to imperative stuff. Because I've seen like people, um, what's this guy's name? There's this guy called Biscuit, I think his name is. There's
Okay.
this YouTube programmer, and he does like this. He does all kinds of really cool projects, but he does them all in C.
Okay.
And like sometimes he like drops down to assembly and whatnot. But he can get things like a ray tracer or a full game engine, all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He just like hacks out piles and piles of C live while you're watching him, right? And he has no problems just because he's so used to it, or maybe his sort of mind just works that way. And I feel like in that way, like my mind works better when I'm working with an FP paradigm than imperative. So like I slowly drifted towards that, and then I have a friend who um, I haven't heard from him in a while. I think he's taking a break from programming or something. John Lavelle. You can check out some of his projects online. They'll drop a link to his GitHub. He uh, he messaged me, saying that he was working on Haskell and blah blah blah. And like he's someone I've known for a long time. Like I knew him in high school. Um, so he was working on a bunch of cool Haskell stuff, and I was kind of jealous because I had no idea what he was doing. Like I couldn't understand any of his code. So over time, like he explained a bunch of Haskell concepts to me, and it sort of took off from there.
Yeah, it seems like he also has some pure script repositories.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of like JavaScript, and like I think I sold him a little bit of on JavaScript, maybe not as much as he sold me on Haskell, but like you can see he's working on one of those FP libraries that I have. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so he taught me a lot of stuff, and I think that was more or less the beginning of actually using Haskell for stuff.
Oh, so basically, this your friend John basically kind of got you into FP, and he helped you like explain things to you, or maybe gave you books, or just was there for you to
He was just there. I think the main thing he was that like when I didn't understand something, I could ask him a question,
Mm-hmm.
and he knew the answer, or he would like point me to something, or we could sometimes he didn't know the answer, and we would just work it out together.
Cool.
I think that was like an important aspect of being able to learn Haskell because there's like lots of stuff that I was really confused about, and sometimes you know
Yeah.
how it feels like you read like 15 different explanations and none of them click.
Yep.
So I think having someone like interactively sort of like address whatever it is that's the roadblock for you.
Yeah, and especially if it's somebody who knows you, right? Because then they know what kind of explanation you would get. I think that's also a big important thing, right? Because
Yeah, I
if
think
you
one
write
other.
something, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So
Sorry.
like if you try to write a blog post, then you have to make it such that at least in your opinion most people get it, right? But if I were to explain the same thing to my mother or my wife or my brother, I would use vastly different explanations, right? Because my mother doesn't know pretty much anything about computers. My brother does know stuff about computers, but he's not a computer scientist. And then my wife knows theory, so I might try to figure out, okay, what kind of mathematical object could I use to explain this idea, right? So yeah, but then when you write a blog post or a book or whatever, you kind of you can make it specific, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. There's also like this psychological thing too, like if you know someone and you're comfortable with them, it's easier to ask them like things that you feel are like stupid questions. Hello, aimed 7.
Hello, welcome. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, so that's how you got. So roughly do you remember how long ago it was that you started with Haskell and
Uh,
FP?
I don't know. I think it was like somewhere in 2016, late 2016, something like that. I think I've been doing FP for a while, but I haven't maybe been doing Haskell for longer than 4 or 5 years.
Okay. So it's Haskell for 4 or 5 years, but FP for a bit longer because you've been doing like FP flavored JavaScript or other things, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, cool.
I can
Uh,
look up. Maybe I can.
I mean,
And
only
I
if you feel like
bought
it.
this
I
book
don't think it's
instead.
very important to get it exactly right. So unless you actually want to.
Yeah, I'm curious, but I think I'll
Mhm.
have to open my Keybase, and my Keybase tends to crash my computer.